What would you do if you were performing in front of 70,000 screaming fans and noticed one person who wasn't singing along? Taylor Swift's answer to that question turned an ordinary concert into a life-or-death emergency that nobody saw coming. It was August 3rd, 2024, at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. The Eras Tour was in full swing, and the energy was absolutely electric. Taylor had already blazed through Cruel Summer, The Man, and You Need to Calm Down. The crowd was losing their minds. Every single person in that stadium had waited months, sometimes years, for this moment. But what none of those 70,000 people knew was that in section 128, row 14, a 61-year-old woman named Linda Morrison was about to experience the most terrifying and miraculous night of her life. Linda Morrison wasn't your typical Taylor Swift fan. She was a retired nurse from Pasadena who'd raised 3 kids as a single mom after her husband died in a car accident back in 2003. She'd worked double shifts at Huntington Hospital for 23 years, never taking vacations, never splurging on anything for herself. Her daughters had surprised her with Eras Tour tickets for her 61st birthday, and Linda had cried for 2 hours straight when she opened the envelope. This wasn't just a concert for Linda. This was proof that life could still surprise you, even after decades of just surviving. She'd beaten breast cancer in 2019. She'd lost her youngest daughter to a drug overdose in 2021. She'd lived through things that would have broken most people, but she was here, wearing a homemade friendship bracelet her granddaughter had made, ready to sing every word. For the first hour and a half, Linda was having the time of her life. She knew every lyric, every beat, every pause. Her voice was hoarse from screaming. Her feet hurt from dancing. She'd never felt more alive. Then Taylor started playing Lover. The stadium lights dimmed to a soft purple and pink glow. 70,000 people started swaying together, holding up their phone lights like modern-day lighters. It was one of those perfect concert moments where everything feels magical and intimate, even though you're in a massive stadium. Taylor was sitting at her piano, her voice soft and sweet, singing about a love that feels like home. Linda had her eyes closed, swaying with the crowd, thinking about her late husband and how this was his favorite kind of song. Slow, romantic, simple. That's when the pain hit. At first, it felt like indigestion, a tight squeeze in her chest that made Linda pause mid-sway. She'd felt this before during stressful shifts at the hospital, probably just anxiety from all the excitement, she thought. She tried to keep singing along, but the pressure in her chest was getting worse. Within 30 seconds, the pain became crushing. Linda grabbed the seat in front of her, her breathing suddenly rapid and shallow. The woman next to her noticed immediately. "Ma'am, are you okay?" the woman asked, her face full of concern. Linda tried to answer, but she couldn't get the words out. The pain was radiating down her left arm now. Her vision started to blur. She knew these symptoms. She'd seen them 1,000 times in her nursing career. But it couldn't be happening to her. Not here. Not now. Taylor was still singing, completely unaware, her voice floating through the stadium. "Can I go where you go? Can we always be this close forever and ever?" Linda collapsed into her seat, her body going limp. The woman next to her started screaming for help. But in a stadium of 70,000 people, all singing along to a ballad, individual screams don't carry far. People nearby turned to look, confused about the commotion. Someone pulled out their phone to call 911. That's when something extraordinary happened. Taylor Swift, in the middle of the second verse, stopped singing. She kept her hands on the piano keys, but her voice just stopped. The backing track continued for a few seconds before the sound engineer quickly faded it out. The sudden silence was jarring. 70,000 people went quiet within seconds, confused and concerned. Taylor stood up from the piano and walked to the edge of the stage, squinting into the crowd. Something had caught her attention during a brief moment between verses. A cluster of people standing when everyone else was sitting. Frantic movement in one specific section. "Hold on," Taylor said into her microphone, her voice calm but serious. "Hold on, everyone. Something's happening." The stadium lights came up slightly, just enough for Taylor to see better. Her crew was already rushing around backstage, trying to figure out what was going on. Security was getting radio calls from Section 128. "There's someone who needs help," Taylor continued, pointing toward the section. "Security, I need you in Section 128 right now. Medical emergency." The crowd was dead silent. You could hear people breathing. Phones were up, recording everything. Nobody knew what was happening, but everyone understood it was serious. Linda Morrison's heart had stopped beating. The woman who'd been sitting next to her was performing CPR, counting compressions out loud, her voice shaking. She'd taken a CPR class at her gym 6 months ago and never thought she'd actually use it. Other people nearby had cleared space, formed a protective circle, and were flagging down security. Stadium security arrived within 45 seconds, but those 45 seconds felt like hours to everyone watching. They had an AED, an automated external defibrillator, which they immediately placed on Linda's chest. The device analyzed her heart rhythm and delivered a shock. Taylor was still standing at the edge of the stage, watching it all unfold. She'd taken off her in-ear monitors so she could hear what was happening. Her band members were behind her, equally concerned. Nobody had ever stopped an Eras Tour show before. Nobody knew what to do. "Is she breathing?" Taylor called out toward the section, though she was too far away to actually hear a response. A security guard near the stage grabbed a radio and relayed information. "Paramedics are 2 minutes out. Patient is unresponsive. AED deployed." Taylor made a decision right there. "Okay, everyone," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I need you all to stay calm. We've got medical personnel with her right now, and an ambulance is on the way. Let's give them space to work." Then she did something that nobody expected. She started talking to the crowd like they were old friends sitting in her living room. She told them about the time she'd witnessed a medical emergency at a restaurant and how scary it was to feel helpless. She talked about the importance of knowing CPR. She kept 70,000 people calm and quiet by just talking, being human, being real. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes after Linda collapsed. They rushed through the crowd with a stretcher and medical equipment. The woman who'd performed CPR was crying, shaking, telling them everything she'd done. The paramedics worked quickly and efficiently, getting Linda stabilized enough to transport. As they were wheeling her out on the stretcher, Taylor did something that made the entire stadium gasp. She put down her microphone and jumped off the stage into the security pit, then climbed over the barrier into the audience. Her security team immediately surrounded her, but she pushed through until she got to the stretcher. Linda was barely conscious, an oxygen mask over her face, but her eyes were open. Taylor leaned down close to her. "Hey," Taylor said softly, taking Linda's hand. "You're going to be okay. They're taking great care of you. What's your name?" Linda tried to speak but couldn't through the oxygen mask. The paramedic answered for her. "Linda Morrison, 61 years old, likely cardiac arrest." "Linda," Taylor said, squeezing her hand. "I'm coming to check on you, okay? I promise, you hang in there." Linda's eyes filled with tears. She managed the tiniest nod before the paramedics had to keep moving. Taylor climbed back on stage, and the entire stadium erupted in applause. Not the usual screaming fan applause, but something deeper, respectful, grateful. "Okay," Taylor said, taking a shaky breath. "Give me like 2 minutes to pull myself together, and we're going to finish this show for Linda, because I think she'd want that." The crowd cheered. Someone started chanting Linda. Linda, Linda, and soon the entire stadium joined in. 70,000 people chanting the name of a woman they'd never met. Taylor finished the concert, but something had shifted. Every song felt more meaningful. Every lyric about survival and strength felt like it was for Linda. When Taylor sang "You're on Your Own, Kid" during the surprise song section, she dedicated it to Linda Morrison and everyone fighting battles nobody knows about. But here's where the story gets really incredible. After the concert, while her crew was breaking down the stage, Taylor didn't go back to her hotel. She went straight to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where Linda had been taken. She showed up at midnight, without makeup, in sweats and a baseball cap, with her security team trying to convince her to wait until morning. "No," Taylor said firmly. "I promised her I'd come check on her. That's what I'm doing." The hospital staff was shocked when Taylor Swift walked through the emergency department doors. The nurses who'd been working on Linda couldn't believe it. Taylor asked if Linda was stable enough for a brief visit. She was, barely, but yes. Taylor spent 15 minutes in Linda's hospital room. Linda was awake, hooked up to monitors and IVs, but awake. She started crying the moment Taylor walked in. "You came," Linda whispered. "You actually came. I told you I would," Taylor said, pulling up a chair next to the bed. "How are you feeling?" Linda tried to laugh, but it came out as a sob, like I got hit by a truck. "But I'm alive," the doctors said. They said, if I'd been anywhere else, I probably wouldn't have made it. But because I was at your concert, there were people who knew CPR, an AED nearby, paramedics close by. Taylor held Linda's hand. "You know what I think? I think you were supposed to be there tonight, and I'm really glad you were." They talked for those 15 minutes about Linda's life, her daughters, her late husband, her granddaughter who'd made the friendship bracelet. Taylor told her about her own grandmother and how certain people just have this strength that keeps them going, no matter what life throws at them. Before she left, Taylor did something else that nobody knows about except the hospital staff who witnessed it. She made a phone call to her team and arranged for Linda's entire medical bill to be paid. Every cent, the ambulance, the emergency room, the cardiac intervention, the hospital stay, all of it. "You saved my life tonight," Linda said as Taylor was leaving. "Not just by getting me help, but by reminding me that there are still good people in this world." "You saved mine too," Taylor replied. "You reminded me why I do this." Linda Morrison spent 5 days in the hospital. She had emergency surgery to place 2 stents in her coronary arteries. The cardiologist told her she'd had a 95% blockage in her left anterior descending artery, what doctors call the widowmaker. The fact that she survived was extraordinary. The fact that she'd received CPR within 60 seconds and an AED shock within 2 minutes was the difference between life and death. When Linda was discharged from the hospital, there was a package waiting for her at home. Inside was a handwritten note from Taylor, signed copies of every album, and something else that made Linda sob: 2 VIP tickets to another Erase tour show, with a note that said, "Let's try this again, but maybe skip the medical emergency this time." 3 months later, Linda Morrison attended another Erase tour show in Las Vegas. This time, she was in the VIP section with her 3 daughters. Her cardiologist had cleared her. She was on medications and cardiac rehab, but she was healthy, strong. When Taylor started singing Lover that night, she paused before the second verse and looked directly at Linda's section. "This one's for Linda," she said into the microphone, who reminded all of us what really matters. Linda Morrison is 62 years old now. She volunteers with the American Heart Association, teaching CPR classes. She tells her story at every single class about the night she died at a Taylor Swift concert and how a pop star stopped her show to save a stranger's life. The footage from that night went viral, not because it was dramatic or sensational, but because it showed something rare, a genuine human moment in the middle of a massive production. It showed that fame and success don't mean anything if you don't stop when someone needs help. Taylor never posted about it on social media. She never mentioned it in interviews unless specifically asked. For her, it wasn't a publicity moment. It was just the right thing to do. There were 70,000 people at that concert. Linda says now when she tells her story, "But for those few minutes, Taylor made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered." That's not something you forget. That's not something you can thank someone enough for. The night that Taylor Swift stopped the Erase tour for Linda Morrison reminds us that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop. Stop the show. Stop the schedule. Stop the schedule. Stop the production. Because there's always something more important than the performance. There's always a Linda Morrison in the crowd. There's always someone fighting a battle we can't see. There's always a moment when choosing compassion over convenience becomes the most important decision we make. And sometimes, if we're paying attention, if we're willing to stop and see what really matters, we get to be part of a miracle. That's the real story. Not about a celebrity who stopped a show, but about a human being who saw another human being in crisis and refused to look away. If this story moved you, remember, you don't have to be Taylor Swift to save someone's life. You just have to be willing to stop and pay attention when someone needs help. Learn CPR, carry kindness, and never forget that fame, success, and talent mean nothing if we don't use them to see each other. Sometimes the show stops, and sometimes that's exactly when the real magic begins.